Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video 148, Satanic Magick 2 on Luciferian Paganism. That is, as opposed to part 1, which is about the atheistic side of Satanism. I have to do this in two parts because there are these different groups both using the term Satanism. Part 2 here is about theistic Satanism, and they take two basic forms. There are other offshoots, there are cult groups, as opposed to atheistic Satanists that tend to be very lawful. Some of them are quite libertarian. Their scriptures openly deal with the subject of animal abuse and spurn the concept of sacrifice. Theistic Satanists fall into two separate groups. First, there are those who are essentially pagans. The Joy of Satan would be a good example. They also overlap with certain political philosophies, typically on the far right, or outright National Socialism, which can be interesting when you're having conversations with these people. Their view of Satan is essentially Enki. That is, they look back at the pagan pantheons of old, they identify individual caricatures, deities, that happen to overlap with the concept of Satan as a liberator, sort of the Paradise Lost figure of Satan as a tragic hero. That is a heroic, a liberating figure who saves mankind from eternal slavery in the Garden of Eden, gives them knowledge, and is then cast down in some manner. That would be the paganized version of Satanism. The adoration of Satan in that sense is actually an adoration of older pagan figures. Satan is just the modern counterpart, the Christianized storybook character of Satan, thus is just another name for the same idea. Now, this is common within pagan paths, the adopting of some other figure, overlapping it because of its characteristics or stories about it with some deity you already have. The Romans adopt the Greek pantheon. The Greeks and Romans both adopted outside deities. Alexander praying to the Egyptian gods, bringing some of their veneration back to Greece. This happens over and over in history. It's still happening today with such groups. Then there are theistic Satanists that tend to prefer that as their actual term, who are literal Satan worshippers. But they run the gamut in what they think Satan actually means. Some of these smaller cultic groups, they look at Satan and they say it is essentially the Satan of the Bible. They just happen to venerate the bad guy of the Bible. So-called. I think the God of the Bible is more butcherous and insane, but we'll leave that alone. That's for a different video. They would venerate an inverted Christianity. That is, to them, the Christian God exists, Satan exists in that literal form. They just happen to be followers of the Satanic side of it. Instead of the Christian God, they howl mockery at the cross and so forth. They think Jesus failed generally. No, they look at the Christian God and they see evil. They look at Satan, they see the good guy in those stories. Now, a lot of times, I've spoken with many of these people. Most of the time, their conception of Satan is extra-biblical in nature. That is, if you read the Christian Bible, the Bible used by most Christians, King James, whatever, New English version, you'll find that there's a relative absence of Satan, except with the mistranslation of Lucifer from Phosphoros in the New Testament that actually refers to Jesus falling from heaven and doesn't have anything to do with Satan. What's the actual tale of Satan there? We have him tempting Job. We have him kind of maybe in serpent form, although it's not clear in every path, in the Garden of Eden imparting the fruit of knowledge. And so Satan here is essentially a good guy. He's either tempting somebody so that they can receive greater reward. Just fuck Lot's children and wives that got carried off by the Philistines or some other group. Screw them, at least Job got a blessing. Now he can get new wives and kids, so it's okay, I guess. And it's the way the Christian God operates. I wonder why there are theistic Satanists in the world. But then there are other Satanists, so they're the pagans, first and foremost, like Joy of Satan. They say Enki or Seth or something is the actual god that they worship. They simply use the term Satan interchangeably because the tales happen to be similar. Then there are the theistic Satanists who invert Christianity and worship the bad guy of the Bible. And then there are those who, they're not pagans because it's actually just Satan that they're referring to. And they don't invert Christianity. They don't see Satan as a bad guy. They see Satan as a god in his own right, a pagan figure in that sense, I suppose. Although it's also technically inverted Christianity, it's sort of a weird fusion of the two. And there are certain groups that venerate Satan incarnate as a literal physical being, essentially a deity capable of taking physical form, imparting certain powers to his followers or congregations. These groups tend to be relatively less common. I think at this point, theistic Satanism typically is still about groups that invert the Bible, mock the Christian God, and venerate the literal devil. In one sense or another. Again, they don't necessarily all agree with one another on the philosophical tenets of such worship. Second to that, certainly pagan-style Luciferianism has exploded in growth. We would see the joy of Satan and some of these similar groups have grown quite large over time. There aren't that many, by the way, to people who are worried about Satanism. There aren't that many of these little cults that do like the blood sacrifice, kill the cat sort of stuff. Those tend to be not really religious in nature. It's just somebody has fried out their mind, or they're suffering from a mental breakdown at the time. They think, oh, you worship the devil, spin the record backwards and listen to some backmasking, and then they go off and do something violent. That was a big facet of the Satanic Panic, and almost all of those stories from that entire period of time were totally debunked. That is, it was either somebody who didn't really worship the devil doing these things, or these crimes never actually occurred. There was one famous case, and I think it's the fishiest thing I ever heard in my life, where some dude claimed that his kid had killed his wife, and then had managed to slit his own throat and chop off, I think, one of his own hands or something. And it was physical, like the death was physically impossible. Somebody else had to do this to the kid. I still think the father might have had something to do with that. Maybe he did, and it was already proven, and I just heard nothing else about that case. But it was actually in Geraldo's documentary. There was footage from it. They were trying to blame like a devil worship cult. Oh, he started listening to heavy metal, started venerating Satan, he stabbed my wife to death, and then he basically chopped off his own head. I'm questioning whether that's something that an adolescent is capable of doing. I'm questioning that, unless they're having a total fucking psychotic break. In which case it has nothing to do with Satan, it's a mental illness. And the two are often conflated throughout time. So satanic magic in these paths is more literal than for the atheistic. In the atheistic paths, you get a mockery, usually of Catholic ritualism above all else. And the rituals are psychological in nature. They're meant to be mocking. In the Luciferian paths of the pagans, they would venerate Enki or Seth or something like that unironically. They believe in it as a deity. And so their magic is literal. It is theistic and spiritual. It's not a mockery. It's not a mock-up. It's not a psychobabble sort of ritual. Some of it's intertwined with that. Some of the more New Age style satanic movements do intertwine psychological practices, including psyops in some cases, with their ritualism. Others, though, they take it as though it were a legit pagan practice. Then there are those that don't really have magical beliefs. They simply venerate Satan in a metaphoric sense. They believe in it a bit more literally than the strictly atheistic groups. They have some spiritual beliefs, but their ritualism, if they perform it at all, is really more on the down low. It has more to do with psychology than it does their spiritual beliefs, even if they happen to be theistic in nature. Now, they're very secular and more rational. And so that's a little bit about satanic magic from the non-atheistic perspective. When we're dealing with groups other than the Church of Satan and a half a dozen others that are strictly atheistic, this is the sort of thing, honestly, that we're dealing with. That's about all. Peace out.